Community Forum is sponsored by the Easton Grange 196 and a friend of Yardley Wood Rink and the Easton Lions Club.
There's a storm across the valley, the clouds are rolling in. The afternoon is heavy on your shoulders. There's a truck out on the 4-lane, a mile or more away. The whining of his wheels just makes it colder.
Welcome to Community Forum. Today is April 3rd, 2024, and I'm Priscilla Almquist Olsen, your host, and it gives me a great deal of pleasure to present a two-part series on the extraordinary life and times of Avery Lee Williams. And most of us know who that man is. Those of you who are viewing maybe do not, but you're going to get a glimpse of an extraordinary human being who contributed so much to the life of Easton and to his community. He was generous, he was funny, he was engaging, and he always was serving. So welcome to his son, Kevin Williams. Kevin.
Thank you, Priscilla.
And to my left is Don Tuck, and he's going to talk about the JCs. And then to the far left is John Morgan from the Lions Club, and he's going to talk about John Avery's involvement with, in fact, he probably single-handedly created it or promoted it to its pinnacle of becoming the best Lions Club in the world a few years back. Okay, so Kevin, what was it like growing up in the home of Avery and Betty Williams?
Well, you know, I came on the scene in 1964, so you of course remember my father previous when he was back in his high school days and his college days, but I came in 1964 and he was a young stockbroker in the city of Brockton, and but he also had an organic farm because he grew up raising a lot of vegetables, working with agriculture down in Five Corners in Southeastern, and so he always had those roots. But he got into organic gardening very early. I'd say 1968 or so. So he was way ahead of his time. And so there we were on Beatty Lane in Southeastern on a 5-acre mini farm where Lee raised all his vegetables and animals. And so it was quite an upbringing. We heated the house by wood stove in the 60s and 70s, all organic gardening. Lee raised pigs and goats and chickens, and cattle, beef cattle, and milked a cow, milked a goat every morning, and we just lived off everything that came out of the backyard. And he'd also have a little fun going around to his buddies and saying, "Hey, I'm going to be picking up a couple of pigs. Would you like to go halves?" And I don't know, Don may have gone half on a pig before.
No, I didn't, but I was privy to seeing the farm, that's for sure.
Yes, and so I know John
And
Ames
getting
was
vegetables.
vegetables. John Ames was a partner on a pig, and Jerry Fletcher was a partner on the pig, and Dick Wise, and there were just people scattered all around town that slaughter the pig and cut them up and smoke them and bring them to the house. So it was quite an upbringing from that standpoint.
So it was all about teaching you self-sufficiency.
Yes, well, Dad grew up from Depression-era parents, and life was very tough in Five Corners. There was definitely Northeastern and Southeastern, and as you went down into Furnace Village, it was, of course, near the Norton line and the Mansfield lines, and there were nothing but poultry farms and duck farms and a lot of agriculture. So it was hard scrabble down there. So he always had that. He was a little parsimonious, you would say, and he loved to not throw anything out. If you could get one more use out of it, you used it. And
So he was
you
ahead
kept
of the
it.
game for recycling and reusing items.
Absolutely, and that's why when it came time for the thrift store, it was right up his alley, because that was just something that we're going to get one more use out of it. We're not going to throw this thing away because it's not ready to be thrown out yet. Right, Don?
That's correct. And a lot of that goes back a long way, all the way to his dad saving one-legged ducks because they were still a living product that could be some ways a healthy table process at some point in someone's life. And in the old days, duck farms were a big thing around here. So his dad and many other folks, even my former first wife's dad, they came down from Maine to go to the duck farms along here. So I'm sure that Lee's dad was heavily involved in supplying quality animal for the plate.
Right.
Well, I understood. He told me once that he was it during high school that he got a job at a duck farm, and what were his duties? Do you remember?
Yes, he was down at Harco Orchards in Norton, which is where Blueview Nursery is right now. Those were the grounds, and he would it was a tough job. He'd be slaughtering the ducks, and you'd slaughter the ducks, and then you'd have to pick them and gut them. I don't know, not in that order, I guess, but it was a tough job, ugly job, and but he would try to set the record because Dad was he wasn't one bit lazy, and he would tell me, he said, I think nowadays I would have been diagnosed with ADD if I was a kid because I just couldn't settle down. But folks with ADD are highly, highly productive if they're focused. And so with a little bit of focusing, he was the guy you wanted on the job because he would try to set a record, he would try to increase production, try to win the gold star for the day, whatever it was. That's what he was focused on.
Well, he told me once that when he was 12, that his father took him aside and said, "Okay, you're 12, and now you're going to have to earn money to pay for your clothes. We'll feed you, but anything you put on your body or anything extra that you want in your life, you are going to have to pay for that." Yeah. Now, how many 12-year-olds would get that message today? But Avery, that was a challenge, and he became a paper boy. He'd pick up his papers at O'Connor's news store, and he would slaughter the ducks. Now, I don't know, for a 12-year-old to slaughter ducks, I mean, that's pretty.
It's tough.
That's tough.
That's a tough one. Yep. But you do what you have to do, and a lot of folks nowadays have kind of lost sight of. We have to do what we have to do sometimes.
Right. And Don, on that message, what did you and Avery do when you had to do something you had to do when you started the JCs, right?
Well, say again about the day start. Tell me again.
Oh, well, sometimes you have to do what you have to do, and he laid out. I believe didn't you and he work together to start the JCs in Easton?
Well, it wasn't only myself. It was a number of others, the Poitresses, the Gardners, the Hurleys. There's so many names that will escape me at this point in time. Virgil Andrews, nice folks, hard-working, salt of the earth, and the whole theme of the JCs was to get young men in action, and then later on in life they did have JCettes, so that we were all inclusive, but the women really were the basis of keeping us going to do all types of things, run auctions, run potluck suppers, run dances. Everybody had their, like Lee would be cooking beans and bring them to the potluck suppers. But everyone else had a specialty like stuffed cabbage leaves, and some people were fishermen and they would bring their fish of the day, and then we would have quail at some points, and we would have trout, and we would have rabbit, and game dinners. All of those things spun off because there was a broad section of the humanity here in Easton where people traveled and some never left town. But
So John,
they all had a commonality because they enjoyed each other being together. And then town politics, of course, would get into it as well. And so, and then not only town, but state politics came along. And so one of the things Lee was big on was, well, let's get out the vote in the town of Easton. We need to have a quorum. So in different locations that he had for his office in Brockton, in the old days, you can remember the old dial black telephone. Well, he had a bank of 7 of those, and we would go over there and remind folks that it's time to get out to the town meeting. Show up or your taxes are going to be impacted. And if people understood that today, they'd be more at the town meetings and figure it out. However, that was his modus operandi, just let's get out the vote. And then that transferred over to John Ames running for state office and a couple of other fellows down the road from John. But we walked all the streets in Raynham and Easton and Mansfield, and we stood at the train depot and asked people if they would come and vote. And then also at the train depot, it brings to mind, has anybody asked you to join the JCs as they're getting off the train? And later on in life, that would be the same thing for the Lions Club. Has anybody asked you to join the Lions Club?
So
It was great. So
tell us how the activities that Don has so beautifully described, how did those activities translate over into the Lions? Was it a natural transition, and how did it come about?
Well, it's interesting that to learn about Lee's involvement with JCs, another civic organization that he was involved in that laid seeds to his later work in the Lions Club. So there's a continuation of thought and act from what Don has shared, what I've known of Lee over the years. So there's certainly a strong thread that connects his experience as a leader in the JCs to his experience as a leader in the Lions Club.
And what do you remember, John, about the first time you met Avery?
Well, Lee had been in the club for a number of years prior to my joining. My understanding is he joined the Easton Lions around 1985, which, Don, I'm guessing somewhere around the time that the JCs met their demise.
that's true, and the JCs didn't fall apart on a national scale, it was just locally, because we had all aged out. You were supposed to be young men of action from 21 to 35.
Yeah.
But then the JCs had a program called Exhausted Roosters, so you could still be active, but you didn't have a vote. And in that program, to start the JCs, he developed a program which came from the National JCs program called SPOKE. And this was to orientate you to the methods and procedures. So SPOKE stood for service, participation, orientation, knowledge, and enthusiasm. And when you
Right on.
when you hear the drum beat going, that's what you were doing, you see.
Yeah.
That appointed you to, and you indelibly etched in your mind, this is what you're there for. And it's just like Lions' motto, we serve.
Right.
Well, that goes a long way in your thought process if you just spend some time thinking about it.
So Don, all of you then just transferred over to the Lions, right? Because you weren't of age, you weren't young anymore, or that young. You were still young, 35.
True, but like, I don't know, for the Lions, we got tired of selling light bulbs door to door, beating on people and going out soliciting all the hair salons and everyone else. And so he and I were chatting one day because I'd been on a trip and had to buy a tie and a jacket to attend a funeral, and he had to buy a jacket and tie somewhere he went because it was expected in the dining facility you were going to go to. So he went to a church thrift store and I went to the cancer store, and he went to a church and a thrift store in Florida, and I went to one in California. And so we were sitting around kicking the tires about what to do and how to do it. And so I said, I think we should find a way to have a thrift store here in Easton. We could do well because through JC's, people have been calling us all these days on how to get rid of things. And in those days, the town dump was open and we knew how to get rid of stuff. But when we would bring stuff to the dump, people would be asking us, what are you going to really do with that? And he'd say, well, we're going to toss it over the side. Oh, can I take that back? Well, for a fee, we had to lug it here, So, okay, well, so we'd get some short money, which would pay for the fuel for our running around. But from that, it evolved into, okay, Don, why don't you go out and see if you can find a place to have the thrift store? And he said, I'll support you in it, but he says, you have to propose it to the Lions. He says, because they think I got too many good ideas. And
So from Lee's joining the club in the mid-'80s, he had a very quick impact and quickly became a leader in the Easton Lions Club and was very active from the get-go about bringing members in. Don mentioned that his tagline, has anyone asked you to be a Lions? That was an omnipresent comment from Lee Williams. And our organization was founded in 1917 by a group of people in Chicago, actually, the Chicago Business Association, led by a fellow named Melvin Jones. And our organization came into being when Helen Keller asked that organization to be her Knights of the Blind. And pretty shortly thereafter, Lions Clubs were founded and became international when the first club in Canada came about. And I mention that because the highest award that Lions International will bestow upon a member is the Melvin Jones Award. Lee Williams won that award in 1991, just speaking to his impact as a Lions member. And it's understandable he brought so many of the qualities that he honed through his upbringing, his involvement with JC's, his involvement with the Lions Club, that have a big impact on our club and our community. And there's a theme that permeates the conversations that we're sharing here, Priscilla, and that is the word community. Lee Williams was a devotee of community. He understood the value of community and the impact it has on the society locally and as a whole. So his pursuit of members joining the club and his engagement with those members was remarkable. He would organize groups to go out to different music venues and restaurants to listen to jazz bands or Dixieland bands, all the time building camaraderie, growing the community, assembling folks, and getting them engaged and involved and bonding. He would do these things virtually nonstop, and those things led to the development of projects such as Don mentioned about our thrift store, which today is the largest single financial generator of the Easton Lions. And 100% of those proceeds the Lions get go right back into the organizations and things that we support in this very community. But Don, you recall he was also involved in getting the food pantry going.
The food pantry, just in contacting folks to, can you help us out? And so he was kind of like that go-to guy, and then we had a very responsible person like Ken Wood who could step up to the plate and run with the ball after that. But he was a good counseling person to come back and what do you think and who can we be in contact to help support these issues and that. So it's there's many accolades we could bestow on him, but I guess more conversation will disclose those.
Well, and conversation is a good word to use, and he was good at it, and he was a good resource for so many different causes, and he was also an idea generator for a lot of those causes. His networking skills were absolutely remarkable, and they contributed to him soliciting other help, other organizations, different contributors, both with energies, ideas, finances. His gardening hobby, let's call it, got him involved in raised bed gardening and spreading that idea around different places in Easton. He was the idea behind the bocce courts that have been established around town, and not just the motivation of it, but also the funding components of it. He was involved in the Council on Aging cookouts. He was involved in getting the Easton Town pool going back in the day. Don, what year was that?
You know, it's hard for me to focus on the exact year, but we started with the JCs developing the involvement at the town pool. And we roped in a few of the high school teachers as well, because they could oversee in the summertime for swimming lessons and such as that. So this was an important part of organizational skills, because someone had to work the program, but while the rest of us were out making a living. Mm-hmm. So the teachers were the most likely suspect because they were going to have the summer off. But through the JCs, and then somewhere along the line it fell by the wayside, and then when Lions came on in full force, and we helped to reestablish the pool. But back in the JC's days, the original town pool building, the Gomes family and the Gardners and the Hurleys and the Poitresses and the Valdesur, all of these folks and their brothers who are not related members, but they were related, and they all pitched in just because it's going to be good for the town.
Yeah.
And so we cemented the pool floor, and then someone else came in and volunteered to put up the rest of the building. And then, of course, little varmints ended up burning it down, and so we got back at it and rebuilt it again. And then it's probably been built for a third or fourth time at this point in my life, but we were part of that founding establishment.
Part of that mandate of service, which is the mandate of the Lions Club, "We serve," is the motto, and Lee was the living embodiment of that motto. And I think a key driver to an honor bestowed upon the Easton Lions Club, in 2005, we were voted the #1 club in the world. And Lee's contributions to our club getting to that point of recognition are undeniable. As I look around our community, so many places in our community of Easton have Lee Williams' fingerprints on them. He understood and valued the need for people to have community, to have a sense of belonging, to have a sense of contribution. He understood the importance of bonding and networking. He was an expert in building community, and he touched many things, both with his ideas and his energy and his wallet. And that had a big impact on helping make Easton the wonderful community that it is. He knew it was essential to a sustainable society's development to have a strong sense of community, and we've certainly benefited that from Lee Williams.
Well, Kevin, as you sit here, and we have just about 2 minutes left to wrap this segment up, tell us what's your impression, just listening to Don and John and all the accolades that they've presented about your dad?
Well, he's a wonderful father and a mentor, and I couldn't have had a better father. But I just remember as a kid, as Don says, I'd be hanging around the house and all these guys would be coming over at various times, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and they'd be shuffling in, shuffling out. They were working on different JC projects, Irving Vos, Don Anderson, Ralph Armstead. It just went on and on. And they all had connections everywhere, and they were all mutual aid. When you got the call, it was like the bat phone. When you got the call, you're obligated to help out with whatever project anyone is running. Don still gets these calls. I know he does. So
Yeah, and I refer them to others these days because I'm not into lugging and tugging. I do some, but not a lot. But back to that point about being involved, the state of Massachusetts came out with a lights on for safety in the 70s. And we developed the method of having, why not get people to stay home on Labor Day? So let's have a big picnic. And the old days, prior to us starting the Villa Rosa JC field days, we got kids involved in games and cookouts and all. But prior to that, the Norton barbecue was very big, and you got meat on a skewer and you cooked over an open fire with these long steel rods, and we still have those long steel rods hanging around today. But
Don, I'm going to have to
and Lee
interrupt. I have to interrupt. You're going to save that for the second part, and we can all remember the Villa Rosa and all those days and how the community was brought together. So this is Priscilla Almquist Olsen for Community Forum, and stay tuned for part 2 of the extraordinary life and times of Avery Lee Williams. Thank you for watching. Till next time, be well.
Community Forum is sponsored by the Easton Grange 196 and a friend of Yardley Wood Rink and the Easton Lions Club.